We are going to televise this and record it, so, behave yourselves and keep it clean. No, as you all do. Well, I thank you for being here today. And before we begin, actually, Suzette Sybil, our Assistant City Manager, would like to say a few words for the introduction on behalf of the City Manager's Office.
Thank you, Kimberly. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the 2018 hurricane season kickoff meeting for the City of Pompano Beach. I did want to take this opportunity to thank Fire Chief John Jurgel and also Kimberly Spill Cristiano, the city's emergency manager, for all of their efforts in coordinating this annual kickoff meeting. And not only for coordinating the annual kickoff meeting, which we do every year, but also for, on an ongoing basis, coordinating regular training exercises for the city employees at our Emergency Operations Center. And the reason we do that is to ensure that all of our city employees are going to be prepared in the event that a disaster were to impact the City of Pompano Beach, to basically ensure the safety and welfare of the residents of the city. Now, as you're aware, a disaster can take many forms, right? Could be a terrorist attack within the city, could be an active shooter situation, which is something we're used to seeing on the news media lately. But what's most customary for us here in the city are tropical storms and hurricanes. I did want to remind everyone that tomorrow, June 1st, is the beginning of the 2018 hurricane season, right? We're all not so excited about that. And basically with that coming, again, we want to ensure that we have all of these ongoing trainings. Now, last September, we were fortunate because when Irma actually made landfall within the City of Pompano Beach, it only had sustained tropical storm force winds. But I'm sure that if it had impacted us at a greater magnitude, that based on all of these ongoing training exercises that we go through on a regular basis throughout the year, that we would have been prepared to address the needs of the residents if that need had arose. Now, because we are city employees, we're all considered essential. And what that means is that the city manager can call in any of us at any point in time to participate in pre-preparedness activities before disaster actually approaches us, because with hurricanes and tropical storms, usually we do have a little bit of warning time, right? He can also require that we station ourselves at the city's Emergency Operations Center during the disaster. And of course, he can require that we participate in post-recovery efforts following that disaster. Now, the reason why I want to mention that we're essential and that we're on call is because we're on call and we can be called in at any point during those 3 phases of a disaster, we want to make sure that we take the time to prepare our families and that we have our own procedures in place to ensure that they're safeguarded in the event that we do have to be called back to the city to address the needs of our residents. Now, I did also want to mention about documentation. It's something that you hear from us on an ongoing basis, right? And as we're participating in the pre-preparedness procedures, or actually during the disaster, we're hunkering down at the EOC Center, we're participating in post-recovery efforts, we want to make sure that we're documenting all of those activities very meticulously, whether it's our time or whether it's the time we're spending using city vehicles or equipment. And the reason why that's important is because we want to try and maximize efforts to get reimbursement for all of the disaster costs and expenditures that we incur here at the city on behalf of our residents, for reimbursement from the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the state of Florida. So again, we want to just be reminded about that, and it's very important that we document all of those activities. Again, I want to thank you all for your service to the city and all of its residents. Here's to hoping that we have a very uneventful hurricane season this year, but I'm confident, once again, that based on all of our training, that we'll be prepared for whatever comes our way. With that, I'll hand it back over to Kimberly. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Suzette. That's a very valuable introduction, and we greatly appreciate the leadership that we receive from the City Manager's Office and our elected officials, so thank you all for that. And right now, we have to hold questions to the end because we have a very full agenda. So right now, I think Chief Jurgel, our fire chief, and also my boss, would like to say a few words also. Thank you, Chief.
Good morning, everyone. It's always tough following Suzette. First of all, she stole all my thunder, but I do want to thank the Weather Service for the wonderful, beautiful morning we have, right? Just to get everybody in the mood, right? To get everybody in the mood. So, but it is. He has promised that it will clear up later on today, right? So, great. Thank you, everybody, for being here. 37th year here, and every year hurricane season comes. It's just like taxes. They just show up, right? So, but what I do know is every year this city has prepared itself and its citizens for hurricane season. And what I've learned is that's how we get through this, both individually as well as a city, is our training and our preparation and ultimately our teamwork. Those are the three things that are going to get us and this city and the citizens that live through a hurricane, if we're unfortunate enough to have one hit us. That's what's going to get us through. I can tell you this, we are so much better now with our hurricane preparation, both from a planning standpoint and a prediction standpoint, than we were earlier. And I think we get better each and every year. Kimberly does a phenomenal job in helping us all get prepared all year long for any type of disaster. But we tend to be much more focused during the summers with the tropical issues that we have to deal with. So it's going to be another hurricane season. That is going to happen. There are going to be storms out there, and it only takes one for us. I don't know what the actual prediction is on how many storms, because to a certain degree, that doesn't matter to me. I only care about the one that's going to hit us. So I will tell you from my standpoint, both personally and professionally here for the city, I prepare every year as if we are absolutely going to be hit by a major storm. Things that I learned last year in my personal plan that did not work, I've adjusted this year. Organizationally at the fire department, things that we learned last year that did not work, we're changing. So I am confident from a city standpoint, because of our preparation, because of our planning, because of our teamwork, if we do have an incident here with regards to a hurricane, we will be prepared. We will perform like we always do. The citizens will be proud of how we perform, and that's their expectation of us. So I thank everybody for their commitment. I thank you for being here. Hopefully we don't have to spend another week of long nights and days together this year. And if the Weather Service Bureau cooperates with us, we'll be good. So, thank you very much. Yeah, no pressure, right?
Poor Rob. Thank you, Chief. Outstanding leadership again, and working with Chief for the last 12 years plus has just been a great time for me, because we have the support from our leadership to do what we need to do. So with that, I just want to go over some of the other agenda items that we'll be speaking about. I'm going to do just a little bit of an EM overview and some of the preparedness items that will help not only us but our public. Because what we found last year when we televised this was that the public was very receptive to seeing this information. So a lot of the messages that we always give to our employees also will benefit the public. So that's something that we've kind of added this year to tailor it to both. And from Human Resources and Risk Management, we have Ed Beecher, our Human Resources Director. Later on, he'll be discussing the emergency closure policy and the importance of our essential personnel. Our Public Communications and Marketing Director, Sandra King, she'll be going over some of the new technology changes and things that we are doing to enhance our public communications before, during, and after disasters. And for disaster cost recovery, we have Andrew Jean-Pierre and Allison Furtado. She's our controller, and Andrew, our finance director. Very important information you heard Suzette touch upon, and you've heard me preach about for the last 11, 12 years, is disaster cost recovery. Returning back to normalcy after disaster is critical for us to make sure that the city's well-being is done. So that's a very important area. And last but definitely not least, we have our guest speaker, Mr. Rob Molleda. He's our warning coordination meteorologist from the National Weather Service and NWS National Weather Service Forecast Office from Miami and South Florida. They are tremendous partners. For those of you who were in the lockdown modes with us at the Emergency Operations Center, you know that they are our guide. And they help us tremendously with real-time information and what predictions. So we really appreciate you taking the time to be here, because I know this day, I actually booked Rob in January to get him here for today. So thank you, Rob, for being here again, as he was last year. Here's a photo that I just love, because I said I think it represents a lot of what we went through last year. I think we feel a lot more prepared, just having gone through Hurricane Irma. This is our one of the team pictures, and it doesn't even include everyone. The city manager was our commander-in-chief, and he went with a theme of do good. So we knew the moment we walked in the door, our main overall mission was going to be do good for our public and get through this together. And I don't know about you, but that day was very scary to me when we came in. I think I came in a day earlier, and the last time I looked at the beach, and I thought, well, you know what? This could be the last day that we see things the way we see them and the way we do them. We were extremely fortunate, but we all came to this EOC, left our families thinking, you know, that Cat 4 or 5 that was pointed at us at the time could impact us, and we were all there. And I just can't say enough about our team, because that was definitely a trying time for us all. And the phases of emergency management, you know, every disaster, you know, to create that team doesn't just happen overnight. It's your hard work all year long. That's often unseen in the background, the training, the planning that you do, planning, training, and exercises that we do before a disaster occurs. And obviously, every phase to every disaster, this is pretty much what it looks like. The mitigation, you've heard us talk about that. You know, there's certain things that we can do to retrofit our buildings, certain things we can't do, but we look to see how we can lessen the impact of a disaster. Preparedness, that's, you know, what we do individually with our families, and it's also what we do at work for our department planning. And obviously, response after disaster occurs, that is actually a shorter amount of time than recovery. Recovery can take a very long time. We're still working with FEMA and recovery costs right now for our reimbursement. So it's a very long process, and I think we still even have a project left out there for Wilma that we're still battling over with. So that's a very long time. The preparedness cycle, you know, as you just heard me say, as we do our planning and training and organizing, as we go through this process, we used Hurricane Irma as a perfect example to say, okay, we brought in an independent consultant to say, okay, evaluate us. That's kind of scary because you're vulnerable to what the ratings are going to be. It's like going through a review. And you look at this and you say, okay, well, how did we do? And they point out what our strengths were and what areas we could improve upon. It was a very valuable tool, and we're using that, and we're working on it, and we're doing, you know, going through the entire list. Some things take a little longer to correct and move through, but it makes us better and it makes us stronger ultimately. And thank you, Suzette and Chief, for, you know, I think I finally hit home where it's not just about hurricanes, because I know how many times I walk around the last, you know, few years and people say, well, it's not hurricane season, so what are you doing? You know, what do you do all year long? And it's a common thread amongst all of our emergency managers, you know, that I speak with. What do you do? And so that's our constant education. And like, use those moments and opportunities for training. What do we do? And it's assisting building that plan. You start with a framework of a plan for the local mitigation strategy. You build out your comprehensive emergency plan, and you go from there. And you try to build and anticipate any type of disaster, any type of threat or hazard. And I don't have to tell you about, you know, recent events that have happened here in Broward County with shooting incidents. You know, Fort Lauderdale Airport, we've taken their after action plan, and we've looked at Parkland and learning from that opportunity and how to develop family reunification centers, and also how to develop family assistance centers and how we can be of service to that, because schools have come to us, people have come to us and say, how can we make sure we have a plan in place for this? And about hurricanes, so here's Hurricane Sandy, and there's our pier. There's our lovely pier. You know, just illustrating, even a drive-by can hurt. Because if I ask anybody, did we get hit by Sandy? No, we didn't. No, we didn't. But it was a really close call. It came by, it went very close to us, caused a lot of devastation up north that they did not really anticipate. But here's what came very close to us and does do considerable damage to the beach area. And it could even cause storm surge in inland area too. We've had tornadoes. So this is one of the tornadoes, and I love this picture. Thank you, National Weather Service and Rob Maeda, for your team. They immediately came out to do a damage assessment with our building department also to see what kind of damage we did have, to categorize, was it a tornado, what type of tornado, et cetera. And I know our BSO folks were a little scared there when we were doing some of your exercises in the parking lot nearby. So it came suddenly and it left suddenly. And what will tomorrow bring? This is an older slide, because it has Deepwater Horizon on it. We've had, you know, Zika, and there's pandemic kinds of threats, there's terrorism, tornadoes, all of that kind of good news. But yet our tropical cyclones are still our greatest threat. So this is the time of year where we usually get most people's attention, and I get the request to do presentations at homeowner associations, et cetera. And coincidentally, on this slide, didn't even notice it till last night, but the peak is actually September 10th. And where were we September 10th last year? In the EOC. So I put right on there, Rob. That was every once in a while. Every once in a while. I said, oh my gosh, that is exactly where we were for the peak of the season. So, but not to say, right? Storms happen all year. Before hurricane season this year, we had the subtropical Alberto. So it can occur any time of the year. But everybody needs to have a plan. And I think there's never enough time. And I think if anybody is truthful with themselves for last year, nobody has enough time to prepare and do all the things that you want to do in your home and personal life before you need to show up at the EOC or wherever your department has assigned you or staged you to work. This is something that I think we can all improve on, whether you're a resident or employee. What do you need to have in place? Do you know if you're in an evacuation zone? Do you know what your plan is if you're going to leave, depending on the category of storm, or do you need to leave? Can you go to a friend's house? Shelters are a place of last resort. They are not built for long-term housing. So always keep that in mind. Don't forget your loved ones that have special needs or vulnerabilities. Every family is different. Do you have pets that you need to take care of? And make sure you have a plan for them. Make sure you have a crate for them. Do they have proper vaccines? The county right now, as of I received an email from them last night at 9 o'clock saying they are still reevaluating where certain pet shelters will be. Right now, there are 3. Last year, there was 1. So they are trying to learn from their lessons that they learned last year also. So things are constantly changing, and we need to evolve with that. Don't forget insurance. Insurance is a big deal. Evaluate. Do an inventory of your house and what you have and what you need. You can use your camera. You can use. There's so many now electronic devices that allow you to incorporate that kind of technology and maybe put it in a safety deposit box. For me personally, I have family mementos because my parents have passed. I have mementos that I have kept and I don't want anything to happen to. What did I do? I spread them out over like 3 different locations. And a little neurotic, I don't know, but I kept some in my house, I put some in storage, and I put some in my mother-in-law's house. And that was my plan, because I wanted to make sure I did as much as I could to try to keep some of these things. So that kind of planning. And don't forget tax-free disaster supplies, that we have a tax holiday, starts tomorrow on hurricane season, the beginning, and runs through the 7th. And that allows you to buy even generators I saw on the list, batteries, generators, anything that you might want to include in your supply cabinets. And our city department plans. I know that I'm almost preaching to the choir with this. Most of you do know, but we have a lot of change in staff. If one thing is true and constant, it is change. We had a stable, I'd say 5 years where there wasn't a lot of movement in staff. And then Chief and I looked around last November, before you realize it, or last September, before you realize it, there's a whole new staff and people that have not been doing the exercises as regularly. So it's a constant wheel of planning, training, and exercises. So know your plan, know what your role is in that plan. Obviously, you've all heard about the National Incident Management System, and I commend you all for doing that, because that keeps us with compliance with federal guidelines for training, because it also allows us to receive federal grant dollars. So we really appreciate you always staying up to date on that. And our Emergency Operations Center schedule, as you know, we have A shift and B shift and alternates. That will always be evaluated based on whatever the disaster is and the level. Come prepared for 3 days. We try to augment and have some supplies, but we really do recommend that you bring your own supplies too, to make sure that you're ready to go. And this, even though you can't see the detail, but you're all very familiar with this, this is our chart for organization and really how we feed to the public and our elected officials and our command, the city manager's office, and how we then, through operations planning and our logistics, how the whole operation works and how every position is critical. Every position in this, because if we end up with one gap in that area, then we may have some issues and challenges. So this is something that we plan and train on regularly. Evacuation shelters. For those of you who don't know, I believe you do all know now, especially this year, Pompano Beach High School is the public shelter. And at Northeast 6th Street, the homeless shelter is on Blount Road. That will evacuate. We used to provide some staff there, and we found out last year that they do evacuate. They're evacuated by the county. And special needs shelter and transportation, please pre-register, because what you'll see in the slide presentations is you will see this website more than once. Pet-friendly shelters also pre-registration. The Vulnerable Population Registry, I really wanted to highlight again this year, because this is for people who decide not to evacuate, and they are going to stay in their home, but they have a vulnerability or frailty, and you can see here a health issue that they may need assistance with. Now, registering with us does not guarantee a service or a priority. However, it helps us with our planning. It helps us planning, and we do try to do a check on them before, during, and after the storm, because that way we can kind of check on their welfare and see if we can. But depending on the damage level, it may not always be possible. So we like to stress that it is not a guarantee, but we would work with the county to see what we could do to help them. And continued education, training, and disaster planning exercises. Just a note, someone said to me earlier, exercises is not the physical exercises, although you can get up and move around, it's disaster planning exercises. EOC and incident action planning, training and exercises, we'll do more based on what we learned last year and some of the things that we can reinforce for training. Emergency notification tests, we have notification tests that we use internally for our department staff and also for the public. So we'll be doing that. Disaster cost recovery workshop. You'll hear a highlight today of how we work our disaster recovery workshop with regard to documentation and the whole FEMA process. But for those who really use it, and timekeepers and so forth, and supervisors, we'll be holding a workshop at a later date. And also community emergency response team training. We have a program that's been in existence for 20 years. A number of our employees have also taken this class. The public, we really encourage the public to take it. This is something that's hosted by the fire department, and it was originally a FEMA class, and we've carried it on. And this really helps people be prepared in their neighborhoods and then branch out to assist if our services are overwhelmed, how they can relay that information. So that is a very important class, and I hope that when you see that, and I had a little typo, sorry about that. Hate that. At this time, I'd like to welcome Ed Beecher, our Human Resources Director, and he will talk about some other items.
So that was prepared by the Travelers Insurance, and they are one of the city's insurers, and they prepared that for a risk management program. But I thought it was very appropriate to say thank you to everyone here and share with you that the service and your dedication to the city is definitely noticed. So last summer, the city manager had an opportunity to go around to all the city facilities and meet personally city employees. It's one of the things that Greg wanted to do when he became city manager. He wanted to get out and meet everyone and personally shake their hand and have them, have the employees tell a little bit about themselves to the city manager. And one of the things that certainly we picked up on is that we have an amazing team of employees, but there's some longevity in this city. The fire chief mentioned that I think he's starting his 37th year? 38, who's counting? But that's not I think we have an employee that is over 40 years with the city. And we have several that are in the high 30s, been with the city for over 30 years. And that says a lot about our community. It says a lot about our city. I think we have a police captain here, VSO captain. Captain Atkins, how many years? 38 years also. He was 4 years old when he started.
It was a package deal.
Package. You're still with us. That's a great thing. But it does, to my point, it says a lot about the city. We have a great team here. And so that leads into my presentation on essential employees. So I would say that everyone in this room is essential. All right? So you may not be at the EOC physically there during the storm, but certainly when the all clear is given, we are expected to come into work. And we all have heard the stories, or if you haven't, you probably will, from some of the coworkers that are going to say because of the atmosphere and how nervous they are, and that's understandable, that they don't have gas, they can't get in, there's a tree blocking the roadway, they don't have child care, the schools are closed, they're providing parental care for an elderly parent. Those are all very valid reasons why people have a difficult time responding to work. But then I pick up on what Suzette said and what the chief said and what Kimberly said, and that is preparedness starts now. We've already had a storm. We just had Alberto pass our coast, right? So the devastation that's going on, it hasn't even started hurricane season, doesn't start until tomorrow. So you look up in the Carolinas and what they're dealing with. So you have to be prepared, and the preparedness starts now. Start preparing your hurricane kits at home. Make sure you have your proper meds. I definitely make sure I have my proper meds. So that's part of it. One of the things that happened last September was when during Hurricane Irma, the city manager actually amended our closure policy. So it was amended, and it now provides that employees that work during a city closure will actually get up to 24 hours of administrative leave in addition to their pay. So it's a bonus vacation, if you will, and it's up to 24 hours. And why did we do that? Well, we heard a lot from city employees that said, well, wait a second, where I'm working and people are getting sent home and there's a closure. So that was a small, I don't want to call it a token, but a small benefit that we would give those employees that actually come in and work. You could get up to 24 hours vacation time. It's like almost double time. I mean, when you think about it, you're getting your regular pay. All the other pay provisions are in effect. If you work longer than 8 hours, you've got overtime. If it's a Saturday, there's provisions for that. So all the contractual pay provisions are still in effect. This is just in addition for an emergency closure. So there was a change to our emergency closure policy. It has been made available to you. It's on the back table. If people ask about it, please feel free to give them a copy of the policy or have them call HR. We'll be glad to share the information with them. Your contact information. Last year, HR periodically will update all city employees' contact information. So, basic form asking for your name, your phone number, your address. Why is this important? We actually take these sheets of paper with us over to the EOC, and we have what I call the football, and I have a briefcase with all the contact information in that. There has been the occasion in past storms when communications have not been what they are on a normal basis. So if our communications go down, we would like the ability to be able to, if we have to, go out to an address, contact an employee if we haven't heard from them, make a phone call attempt. So that's why it's important that you keep that up to date. If there's any changes in your contact information, just come into HR, send us an email, we can send you the form and you can update it. And I think that, the last thing I wanted to talk about, and Kimberly mentioned it a little bit, and that was insurance. So for department heads, and those folks here that actually are involved in dealing with city properties, if we've added a city property, if we've made significant modifications to a city property, if we have removed a city property, we need to know about it in risk management. And the reason for that is that our insurance is based on what's called a schedule of insurance. So if anyone can read this from where you're sitting, please let me know, because your eyes are great. But anyway, this is a schedule, a list of all of our city properties and their values. And why it's important is that in the event of a disaster and a facility was damaged, we need to have this information available for our insurance company. And then it ties into FEMA as well. So it's very important that we keep that information up to date. Typically, about once a year, we will send this information out to our department heads and those folks in charge of city facilities and ask them to review it and update it and make any modifications to it. So this is the current schedule as of March of 2018. And if there's been any other modifications to it, please let me know. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. Very important information. I appreciate that video because it's so true. I think the city has always shown respect and really caring for people and their families. So I think that's why we have built such a long-standing team. And next, Communications and Marketing Director, Sandra King. She's going to be reviewing some of the updates that we have for this season.
Thank you, Kimberly. Good morning. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the evolution of communication. Basically, right now, we are going from smoke signals to smartphone. And the way we've evolved and how we communicate with each other, let alone how we communicate to the public, has changed drastically. Just in the last 30 years, let me ask, how many people got up this morning, sat down with a cup of coffee, and read their newspaper? 1, 2. How many woke up and looked at your phone? Everybody. So just the way, and showing my age, I don't want to do it, but when I started out working for the police department in Pompano Beach as the public information officer, what I did was I carried this really big thing called a pager, and I had no cell phone, and I carried that pager, and when the media called me, and it was a good 4 or 5 nights a week, I had to pull my car off the road, find a pay phone, you remember those, and use the payphone to call the media. One by one, I would stand there at the payphone and call back. Luckily, they then invented cell phones, and it was Desert Storm phone. Remember those? Those were the size of a microwave. And so I would carry that thing around in a case, and I thought I was really cool because I had no wires attached to my phone. And so you think, and that wasn't that long ago, if you think about it. I don't know how many of you remember, wow, facsimile? That was really cool. Let alone if you go back to landlines, party lines, dial phones, remember those? And it's like, it's a joke now. And how we communicate is amazing. When the facsimile came along, there I was at the fax machine, one by one, faxing piece by piece to Channel 4, Channel 6, Channel 7, 10, Sun Sentinel, Miami Herald, WIOD. That took about an hour and a half. And today, to think that way is people shake their heads going, really? You seriously did that? How old are you? Email, dial-up internet, remember that? That seems like it was forever ago. It really wasn't. Dial-up internet was the coolest thing, and you'd sit and stare at your computer, and your parents would say, what's wrong with you? You know, get outside and go do something. We had emails that we were able to now email press releases and alerts, and that was just, for me, wow, I could do that and not have to go stand there for 2 hours before I went out and did a press conference. And now you just email and distribution lists, and now we attach pictures. And just the way we communicate has gone just skyrocketed. The biggest, in my opinion, technology change in our lives and the lives of how I communicate with the media, smartphones. Smartphones, everyone has one now. Everyone communicates with it. Everyone texts. They don't talk anymore, you text. And so what do you think the media does? My phone blows up. If there's something happening, I usually find out before the fire department gets to the scene. Because they're there, they've got a helicopter in the air that's shooting live pictures back to them, and they tell me what I've got going before I get there. Technology, pictures with smartphones. Now I get to a scene, instead of having to take a picture and fax it or something, I take a picture and I send it via text or email right to the newsrooms, and they've got it on the air. 3 minutes after the event has started, they upload it. And who would think of that 30 years ago? It's just, it's mind-boggling. Now, to keep up with these trends, you have to keep up with them or you're behind. And it's constantly changing. So now the next biggest thing in our world is social media. When social media started with MySpace, Facebook, that was just a way to connect with your schoolmates, with the people you grew up with your family. It was a fun thing to see pictures of little Johnny and things like that. It was a social form of communication. Now, fast forward, what do we have? Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, all kinds of things. And how we communicate is, again, completely changing. When we first started the internet, it was something that was started in the city as a hobby because it was kind of cool and it was the new thing to do, and eventually cities would have them. And so we built that internet up, and now it is, can you imagine how many hits we get a year? 2 million. 2 million. We'll get on a certain page 20,000 hits a month. So if you think about that, we're communicating to the public now without ever talking to them, seeing them. They want instant information like the rest of our society wants everything instantly. So what are we doing when it comes to hurricanes? We're communicating a little bit differently. Used to be fax. You know, it used to be, now they're calling my phone, my cell phone, because they know I'm not going to be in the office. So they know to communicate that way. What we're going to do is, we found this year with Hurricane Irma, I had the webmaster on my phone, and I uploaded information through him, Matt James, who was sitting literally in his driveway on a chair because there was no signal, and so he was uploading things to the website on a regular basis, 24 hours during the storm, because I wanted everybody to go to that website for official city information. With about 200 Facebook pages out there, I didn't want people getting their information from unofficial sources. And what did I learn? I'll give you an example. We were doing a GeoBond presentation, and it was an eye-opener because a woman stood up, and it was a good group of people, about 100 people out in Palm Air, and she stood up and she said she was extremely disappointed in the City of Pompano Beach because they had no information on the internet during the storm. And Suzette was holding me back because I'm like, well, wait a minute. You know, ma'am, I beg to differ. We updated that around the clock. Trust me, I was doing it on my cell phone, updating everything. And she said, no, it wasn't. I was there, I looked, and there was nothing. So instead of arguing with her, I was getting a little agitated because there's 100 people thinking we did nothing. And I said, you know, can you give me the address? It's the city's website. I said, what did it look like? She said, it's got that little dial that goes around. She's talking about the city's app, My Pompano. So she Googled City of Pompano Beach, came up with the app, downloaded it, and to her, that was how she was getting her information. So to me, that said, if one person is trying to get their information that way, there's going to be a lot more who tried to do the same thing. So what are we going to do differently? Whenever there is a storm, we're going to add a module onto the city's app, and it's going to be hurricane updates and information. The city just for the first time hired our first social media person. And we are now going to be Instagramming, tweeting, keeping up with technology, and that includes during a storm. We're going to be tweeting, we're going to update the app, we're going to update all the Facebook pages by going dark on non-official Facebook pages, which means what happens is during a storm, it's very offensive when people are scared, they're afraid, they're watching the news, they're looking at all the social media, and somebody's posting, there's going to be a balloon event this Friday. And it became, in some cities, offensive, and people came forward and said the city was posting about an event in a water park, and we're trying to find out if we're going to live and where we can go, what streets, and so what we will do is we'll go dark, with the exception of the official city Facebook pages, Twitter, and then it will all share the same information, as well as the app. So no matter where people are getting their information, it used to be, it was fun, it was social. Now the president's tweeting. And so if people are looking for their information via Twitter, we're going to give it to them via Twitter. That is now how people are seeking important information, not just keeping up with the grandkids. So one of the things that's important, I'll go back to hurricanes, is Code Red. Another form of communication that we use to communicate with residents. People can sign up through the website. And what's important with Code Red, what has changed, is we used to utilize landlines by using various methods of tapping into all the different landlines. Now, 50% of the people don't even have a landline. It's all cell phone. So people have to go into the app and sign up with their cell phone to get emergency notifications through our Code Red emergency system. So let people know, let your families know, sign up. We'll utilize Code Red before, during, and after a storm, just another means of communication to get out there and get the word out. So kind of a wrap up, that's where we are, we're keeping up, and it's an ever-changing business, and people are more and more looking for immediate information. Wherever they want to get it, that's where they're going to get it. It's not going to be the newspaper necessarily, it's not going to be the radio or the TV. So that's where we're at, and actually it's helpful to us because now we're in charge of what goes out. We don't have to rely on the Sun Sentinel. If it's not in the Sun Sentinel, then it doesn't exist. So now we put it out ourselves. We tweet it. We have control over what we put out. So technology is a good thing, and it can help us. And so as long as we keep up with it, which is what we're doing, we're ever evolving, then hopefully we'll stay above the curve when it comes to communicating with the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Critical information, right? I'm so fortunate to be working with some of these experts that we have here because that's key. And I know that trying to keep up with the technology, and we have Tracy here for GIS, it's constant and it's constantly evolving, and we're constantly trying to take full advantage of whatever those changes are to make sure that we are preparing, responding, and recovering as quickly as possible to save lives and protect property. Next, we have Andrew Jean-Pierre, our finance director, who I've worked with since day one, I believe, on the public assistance portion. That's the documentation for reimbursement. It is also what we use for our insurance. You heard Eddie speak about the property schedule. Very critical information because, as we know, it doesn't seem to go away. We get audits, successful audits, but we get the audits and then FEMA will audit themselves, and the process can go on for quite a long time. And he's been my partner in crime with that. So, Andrew, I'd like to introduce you, and here you go. Here you go.
All right, welcome everyone. I'm going to provide a brief overview on the process and also discuss some changes, minor changes that have been made to the process. As you know, finance, we oversee the recovery process. Our work really starts after the hurricane has passes and everyone is safe. Then we really try to maximize our reimbursement. That's our role in the process. One of the first steps in the recovery process is once the hurricane passes and the roads are safe, we send out our building department to do a preliminary damage assessment. This is the basis for the governor and also the president coming to a conclusion on whether we need assistance. So this is a very important step. All of the counties, all of the cities get together, they submit the information to the governor. He makes a determination, submits it to the president, who then declares a disaster that we can, be reimbursed for. Typically, we'll get we'll receive federal funding. Typically, they fund up to 75%. That's important to note. The city still has a portion that they have to cover between its own funding, and also one important component is insurance. We don't receive any federal fundings for insurance, so that's key to note. One of the key changes this year started for Irma is there's some key dates have changed. The first step, once we've received that determination from the president, is that we will get assigned a program delivery manager. As you can see, this year we were assigned a manager November 17. It doesn't mean it takes 2 months. It just depends on FEMA's resources. But just something to keep in mind throughout the whole process. We want to have the information ready. We don't know when FEMA is gonna show up. So as you're documenting damage, as you receive information, make sure you document it, make sure you provide it to insurance, make sure you send it to finance. Also, with O'Brien, some of you may be familiar with them. They're our disaster recovery specialists or consultants, and they work a lot with the departments. It helps free up, excuse me. They basically help free up me and Kimberly to focus on day-to-day. So you guys will notice they will be in communication with you, as they have been over the last 3-4 months. The next step is usually we have an exploratory call. We'll get introduced to the program delivery manager. They'll just get an initial sense of what damages we have. We don't really need specifics at that point, but they just want to kind of have an idea so they could kind of give FEMA the heads up on what to expect. And we identify who needs to be at the recovery scope meeting. Typically, this will be, department head for each of the major areas. Myself, Kimberly, insurance, our disaster recovery consultant will also be there to assist on, some technical matters. The recovery scope meeting, usually it's usually a week to 2 weeks after we've identified the representative from FEMA who's going to be working with us. Following that, we have an intake, damage, and eligibility analysis. This is very important, as this is the basis for what FEMA is going to reimburse us for. They basically want everything that we've documented, everything that's been identified by city staff. We have 60 days from the recovery scope meeting to identify it to FEMA. If we don't identify it, they will not reimburse us for it. So this is a time where we really, press departments that we need the detailed information. We need to know exactly what was damaged. If you had something that initially you thought it was a repair, like a roof, but you change your mind, you say, okay, now we need to replace it. We need to tell FEMA. FEMA, if we tell them it was going to be a repair, that's what they're going to reimburse. If you change your mind, you have to tell them. Same thing for something as simple as a fence. If you have a fence that's 4 foot, and you say, now it's going to be 6 feet, we have to be in communication with FEMA. Basically, they consider it a scope change, and they will challenge us if they notice something like that. There's 2 types of emergency work. There's really emergency work and there's permanent work. So emergency work, usually we have to get that done within 6 months. Most of that has to do with debris clearing, the work at the ELC, the work by our fire department, public works for safety. Basically, this has to do more with immediate safety. Some examples of categories that FEMA uses: Category A, debris removal. Protective measures, Category B, that's usually the work that for the most part, our firefighters. Emergency permanent work, that's usually, damage to our facilities, parks, the different facilities. That has to be completed within 18 months. So, as you know, we're still seeing purchase orders are still coming in. We're still paying for damages. It takes a while to get the estimates from, everyone's busy. So we are provided some time, up to 18 months. The key is 60 days after the recovery scope meeting, we have to identify it. So we don't have to have the work done, but we do have to tell FEMA what we're going to do. And this is just some more examples of permanent works. This is roads and bridges. Buildings and equipment, utilities, parks and rec. Take pictures. FEMA likes pictures. Before and after pictures is very important. It's part of our documentation. Can never have enough pictures. Okay, and now Allison Furtado will discuss some more documentation.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Allison from Finance, and I'm going to talk to you about documentations requirements for FEMA, because I'm responsible for making sure that we have all the documents for labor as well as for invoices that we will submit to FEMA. So the first documents that we normally require employees to have once you are working during the hurricane is our daily activity report form, which is required for all general employees to document the time, their hours, and what they have been doing during the hurricane season. You need to be very specific in recording your activities during that particular period of time. Also, we have an activity report for the fire department, for the firefighters regarding being on the road, their operations, and so forth. Also, we have documentation requirements if we use any form of generator in operating lighting or to run any building facilities and so forth. We need to have the usage requirements for those generators that are being used. And all the documentation that is required is the equipment, if we use any form of equipment. During the hurricane, there is a standard equipment rate form required by FEMA to be used in order to assess the cost of the equipment usage. And finally, on my end, is that in order to restore or to retrieve all these documents, the forms are located on the S drive on our website. That's it. These are just further.
Thank you, Allison. And poor Allison, I think for the hurricane last year, for Hurricane Irma, she was brought to the EOC, and I think, was it your first day? It was her very first day, and I see someone, I'm like, oh, hi, introduce myself, welcome to my EOC, because if people are arriving voluntarily, I'm all for that. What do you do? And she did a phenomenal job in making sure that we were tracking everything. So Andrew, kudos to you also, because I know that you brought her in, and I appreciate the teamwork that you all do with that, because during that time, it's so difficult to remember a thing just like the daily activity log. And Mr. Ed Beecher kept us all online too, and he'd say, Kimberly, I don't think you've signed today. And I'm like, oh, thank you. So I really do appreciate that, and it really is a team effort. And I am going to just slip through some of these. You know, we are Florida's warmest welcome here in the city, are we not? We're Florida's warmest welcome. And I'd like us to give a round of applause for Mr. Rob Moyeda for joining us again today. I think your microphone is working, right?
Yep, it should be on.
And thank you, Rob. He's been a tremendous partner for years, and his expertise and wealth of knowledge is just phenomenal to us, and we value the partnership. So, thank you.
Thank you, and I extend the same spirit of, appreciation and cooperation to you all, to you and to the City of Pompano Beach for quite a while, for many years now, I guess you can say. The work that we do, we share a common, really mission, which is to save lives and property. And we're certainly very proud of that at the National Weather Service, but really most of all, working with individual cities, working with individual communities. Really, we are, although the National Weather Service is a federal government agency, we are we're at the national level. We're also, and this is really important, we're at the local level. So, I work for the local Miami office. So it's really about establishing those local relationships. That's where it all, to me, that's where it begins and that's where it ends, right? It's where we, us taking care of ourselves and our communities. So I've always valued the partnership that we have with the City of Pompano Beach and Kimberly in particular. So, and we certainly expect to continue that.
Thank you, Rob.
So anyway, good morning, and yes, it is a hurricane season is upon us again. Although we had that early start with subtropical storm Alberto, but oftentimes the A storms are the first of the year are the ones that are kind of nuisances more than anything else. They don't really provide much in the way of impacts, but they just enough to keep us busy. But not every year. We remember 1992, the A storm was Andrew. Of course, that was in August, which was a really late start. So just a reminder that we are in that time of year now when we need to be watching the tropics closely and just not panicking, but being ready, right? Being ready as individuals, as community, and in our roles, whether we work for the city or or anything that we do. Last week we came out with the 2018 hurricane season outlook, as we do every year, usually in late May, and you see the numbers there. So those numbers you see there, compare those to the average. So in an average year, in the Atlantic Basin, which is that area from the coast of Africa all the way to the U.S., so it's a vast area, we average 12 named storms. 6 of those, on average, become hurricanes, and then 3 of those, on average, become major hurricanes. So that's the breakdown, 12, 6, and 3. So those numbers reflect near to above normal number of storms. So the probability that we'll have a near to above normal number of storms is 75%. And those numbers reflect a 70% confidence level. So I know I'm throwing out all these probabilities out there. So to boil it down to something that's simple is that's what we think is most likely to happen this season as far as a range of numbers as far as how many storms might form. Okay, so I think I've said a lot about that, a lot more than we probably need to be said about it. I will say one thing. A lot of people have been asking me in media interviews, is this going to be like last year? We're going to have another season like 2017. Well, a year like 2017 is pretty rare in the sense that we had so many, we had a lot of storms. It was one of the busiest seasons on record as far as number of storms, but it was also an unusually destructive year as far as not just the number of storms, but the number of high-level, Category 4 and 5 storms. We had 4 locations, 4 land areas in the Atlantic Basin had Category 5 landfalls. Not just hurricane landfalls, Category 5. Category 5 hurricane is rare. We don't see those every year. Maybe we see them once every couple of years. I don't know what the frequency is off the top of my head, but it's not a common thing. So to have 4 places to receive landfall from Category 5 storm, that's remarkable. And unfortunately, we saw some of the impacts in the Caribbean islands from those, and we saw impacts from major hurricanes. After a 12-year drought, we had major hurricane landfalls, 2 of them in the U.S., Harvey and Irma. So if we're going to have another year like that one, it's pretty hard to match a year like that. But does it really matter? I would say it doesn't really matter whether we think it's going to be like last year or whatever other year, because first of all, the outlook is not a landfall forecast. There's no way I can tell you now where the storms are most likely to form in August and September, for example, and where they're going to go. We just don't have that skill. The science is not there yet for us to be able to provide that level of detail so far in advance. So the outlook is really only intended to be used as a broad and general indicator of how many storms might form out there. But our expertise kicks in when the storms are beginning to form, or when they're at least within kind of a week or so away, within range, I would say, of the models, computer models that we rely on to give us give us a little bit of that advance notice, if you will, when storms may start to be forming out there. That's usually about maybe within a week, or let's say a week. That's when our expertise really kicks in, and that's when we can provide the most value as far as letting people know when and how we might be impacted by storms. So our preparation, our level of preparation, our level of awareness should be the same every year. As the chief said earlier, we got to be ready. We got to be ready every single year. We live in South Florida, and I'll show a good example of why we should be ready here in South Florida here in the next minute or so. But before that, this is the list of names. Everyone wants to know what the names are going to be for this year, the names that we're going to have to hopefully not stress too much over. We can already get rid of one. Alberto was last week, and there you see the rest. Hopefully we won't get too far down on that list. Okay, last 2 years, after really kind of skating by without a whole lot here as far as direct impacts here in South Florida, the last 2 years we've had some pretty close calls. One much more impactful than the other, of course. We had Matthew in 2016, which passed to our east, and Irma to our west, Irma passing to our west, both passed with about the same distance away from South Florida. So in other words, when I'm talking about the center of the storm, right? Just not the storm itself, just the center of the storm. Both of those passed within equal distances of South Florida, about 90, 95 miles away. So those images show you the radar picture, the radar image from the Miami Doppler radar indicating where the center, where the eye of those hurricanes were at their closest approach to South Florida. But we know, we remember which one had the greatest impact on South Florida. You know, Irma, right? That was pretty obvious. Matthew did impact South Florida, but we got just mainly really some gusts, some wind gusts of tropical storm. They really weren't that long duration or extremely strong. So with Matthew, we were certainly quite fortunate. Even though it was a Category 3 hurricane, with the center of it only 95 miles away, we were on the weaker or west side of that storm. So we were fortunate that Matthew missed us to the east, and we got the weaker part of the storm, and that's why our winds really weren't that strong, and the overall impacts just really weren't all too bad here in southeast Florida. Irma, on the other hand, passed us to the west, or the center passed west of us, which put us on the stronger side of the storm, the east side of the storm. So it does matter a lot, not just where the center of the storm goes, but which way it goes in relation to where we are. So, you know, we always tell people, and you've heard meteorologists throughout the years, most notably Max Mayfield, back, many years ago, don't follow the skinny black line, or don't only follow the skinny black line. I think that's what he meant, because the storm that skinny black line doesn't have to go directly over you for you to experience impacts from a hurricane. And I think Irma taught us that lesson. So just because Matthew passed the same distance away from Irma doesn't mean that we're going to get the same exact impacts from both. So our job in the National Weather Service is to be able to pick out those differences. Every storm is different. Every storm has a different character, a different size, different circumstances surrounding it that we have to take into account and assess those threats on an individual storm-centered basis. And that's the information that we pass along to Kimberly and to really all the local officials and emergency management partners that we've worked with here in South Florida. And by the way, that also includes the media too. So certainly the past 2 seasons have reminded us that we are in hurricane country here. We are in a part of the country that gets hit, or at the very least, significantly threatened by hurricanes maybe not every year, but quite often. So if you've lived here long enough, you're going to get hit by a hurricane. You're going to go through a hurricane. You may go through several hurricanes. So we just have to be ready every year. We've been hit. Those hurricanes have occurred in active years, inactive years, and normal years. So I mean, put that quite simply. Now, what this map shows the difference in the amount of major hurricanes. In other words, by major, I mean Category 3 or higher hurricanes that have made landfall in the southern part of the Florida Peninsula, broken down by 2 eras. The first one is 1920 to 1965, when we were hit by 15 major hurricanes that have made landfall somewhere in southern Florida. In the following 50-year period, 5. So it's been relatively less active, less number of major hurricane landfalls during the last 50 years compared to the previous 45-year period. So what this tells us, I'm not implying here that yes, we're going to go back to that 1920, 1965 pattern. Whether we will or not, I really don't know. But what it does tell us is that we do have a history of being hit by major hurricanes here in South Florida. Of any part of the country, we are the part of the country that's been hit the most by major hurricanes. I'm talking southern Florida and the Keys. No other part of the country. So we really that's just one of those things we have to deal with. And we know with Irma, we had a pretty close call. At one point, it did appear as if we were going to get at least there was a distinct possibility, I'll say, that we were going to get directly hit by a Category 3 or 4 storm. Fortunately, it didn't happen to us here in Southeast Florida, but the folks down in the lower Keys weren't so fortunate. So it's a little bit of a recap of Irma. I don't want to spend too much time, but I think it's good to go back and review our last storm because, first of all, it's fresh on our mind still. And second of all, we can learn lessons from every storm and apply them to future storms. So with Irma, we had sustained tropical storm force winds. By sustained, we mean 1 minute average. So in other words, you take a wind reading over a period of a minute, you're going to have peaks and lulls. The wind doesn't blow the same exact speed for very long. There's peaks and lulls in those wind speeds. So we take an average of that, and that's what we call the sustained wind. So when you hear the report or the advisory saying that the maximum sustained winds are 60 miles an hour, or maximum sustained winds are 100 miles an hour, that's what that means. That's that maximum 1 minute average wind that's contained or that's in that storm. So for the Pompano Beach area, the maximum sustained winds were in the 60 to maybe 65 mile an hour range. Pretty strong winds for a sustained 1 minute average. But what that's not telling you is how high those wind gusts got, those brief 3 to 5 second bursts of wind that occur fairly frequently during the time of those peak winds. And in that case, we had up to 90 mile an hour winds probably in this area. It's hard, to get really precise measurements over a large area, but we had, at the very least, hurricane force sustained winds. Winds 74 miles an hour or higher, probably as high as 90 miles an hour, maybe even a little bit higher than that. And those winds occurred probably about over a 4 to 6 hour period. So when you factor in the fact that we had sustained tropical storm force winds for about 8 to 12 hours, and you combine that with those hurricane force gusts, the end result was the damage that we saw. And the damage that we saw here in Broward County, in the Pompano Beach area, was primarily Category 1 level damage. Yes, Category 1 hurricanes are impactful and dangerous. The Saffir-Simpson scale gives you an idea of, for each category, the wind speed range and the expected type of damage from those winds. And it's relative. So Category 1 is not going to have the same level of impact as a Category 3 or a 5. That's pretty obvious from looking at the scale. But Category 1, taken by, you take that on its own, is reflective of strong, dangerous winds. So, with the type of damage that we typically see with a Category 1 here in Southeast Florida is tree damage. Mobile homes in a Category 1 winds are definitely very susceptible to heavy damage, not as opposed to a CBS structure, a concrete block structure that will be able to withstand those winds better. Especially here in South Florida, our building code is among the strongest in the nation. But again, we have to still take those precautions, because when trees go down, a lot of times those branches, they just don't fall down to the street. Sometimes they fall on roofs. Sometimes those branches go through or can hit the house or go through windows. So if you don't have shutters up, those projectiles can be flying into your house. And all of a sudden, Category 1 hurricane is a nightmare. With tree damage, we always get power outages. It goes hand in hand. And we saw a lot of that, of course, with Hurricane Irma. Any tropical system, tropical storm force winds, hurricane force winds, they're going to knock out power. So, any tropical system is capable or always or usually provides or leads to a big disruption in the way that we do things, right? A disruption in the normal course of activities that we have on a daily basis. So one of the big lessons that we learned is that, that we were reminded of, is that indirect hits matter. We don't have to be hit by the center of a hurricane to feel impacts, to have to spend hours on end at the EOC, or in my case, we were locked down for 36 hours at our office, for the same reason you all were. We were, the conditions were dangerous to be outside on that Sunday of landfall. So we were locked down from 7 p.m. Saturday to 7 a.m. Monday. So we got to know each other really, really well there at the National Weather Service, with only a couple of showers that we could share. But anyway, I don't want to get too much into that. But no, it was, it's just one of those things. We have to, we prepare for it just like everyone else does. we not only forecast the weather, but we have to protect our homes too. We have homes and we have families that we got to think about. We're all professionals and we all have to do our jobs. So when you look at when there's a storm threatening us, we always, one of our primary jobs is to assess the different hazards associated with the hurricane, with that storm, whatever that might be. There's 4 potential hazards, right? We have the wind, of course, but we also have storm surge, especially here in Pompano Beach, being a coastal community. Storm surge is right at the top of the list of our main concerns. Also, rainfall and flooding from rainfall and tornadoes. So let's talk a little bit about storm surge with Irma. We had about 3 feet as far as the highest registered or measured storm surge here in Pompano Beach, and we were fortunate to have the USGS deployed some rapid, they call them rapid deployment gauges, that they just place in different points across the coastline, and they had one over a Pompano Beach pier. Right below the pier, they installed the gauge or the sensor, excuse me. And that one registered 3 feet above, or in other words, the water level got 3 feet higher than that normal high tide at the time. So 3 feet is certainly, that's a lot. When you consider that it's not just 3 feet of water, and that water just stays there, that water is moving in. That water is moving quickly inland with waves on top of that. So it's not just, water just sitting there 3 feet high. No, that water is moving pretty quick. Now, of course, as the water moves inland, the sloping of the land will reduce the inundation or to reduce how far or how much flooding you see as the water goes in. But there was still, with 3 feet of storm surge right at the beach, you're going to have some water deposited on the barrier island, at least at the barrier island. So even though the center of Irma was 90 miles away, the strongest winds were west of us, we still got a pretty decent storm surge from Irma. Now, had Irma tracked even 30, 40 miles closer to us, or 90 miles closer to us, or right over us, let's say, that storm surge could have been easily twice as much, if not even a little bit more. So so you're really significantly increasing the potential threat from storm surge, which storm surge is the #1 killer in hurricane or #1 killer in hurricanes across the country. So storm surge kills more people than any of the other hazards of the storm. So that just gives you an idea there. That was on Fort Lauderdale Beach, and probably could have been somewhat similar here. I don't have any specific pictures that I can recall from Pompano Beach, but certainly Fort Lauderdale Beach has similar surge levels. And that water, again, that water is just not still. It's not just sitting there, not moving. That water is moving, and it's moving quickly. So it's very, very dangerous to be out there. You don't want to be that car there. So because of the threat of the storm surge, the realistic threat of significant life-threatening storm surge, the National Weather Service issued storm surge warnings for the Broward County coastline. Last year was the first year, just happened to be the first year that we issued official storm surge warnings. We rolled it out in 2017, and sure enough, 2017 we got storms that required us to issue these warnings. So these warnings were sent out again, to the public via the normal dissemination means, in the same way that we send out the hurricane warnings, for example, or the flood warnings, or tornado warnings, any high-level weather alert. And the storm surge warning was, again, there's the definition on the screen, that's for the danger of life-threatening inundation from rising water moving inland. So Broward County was certainly in that area of concern from the danger of life-threatening inundation. And these warnings have to be issued 36 hours in advance. We can't wait until that storm is just offshore. We're getting ready to make landfall because by that time it's too late. And one of the things obviously that we use storm surge forecast for is to determine potential evacuations. I know this map I think we popped up earlier, and Pompano Beach is well within those two zones that we have here in Broward County. Zone A, Barrier Island. Zone B is the mainland up to US 1. Those are the areas that, based on elevation studies, based on storm surge simulations, or I should say hypothetical storm surge situations that they're hypothetical, but they can occur right in real time. That's the area that is most at risk from life-threatening storm surge inundation. They're close enough to the coast that the storm surge in a not even a worst case scenario, it could be a category 3 or 4 direct landfall, or God forbid a category 5 direct landfall. Those areas, or at least significant parts of those colored areas, could get life-threatening inundation. So that's why the evacuation orders are issued, because again, the storm surge is the #1 killer in hurricanes. The saying goes, hide from the wind, run from the water. You can hide from the wind, shutters up, you can go to your plates, you can go to your interior room in a hallway, and more than likely, there's a very, very high chance, especially with our building codes here, you're going to make it out okay. But you can't hide from the water. So like every storm, Irma was a multi-hazard event. Wind, water from flooding, from storm surge, water from flooding from rainfall, and we have, with every landfalling hurricane or nearby hurricane, we have the threat of tornadoes and those outer rain bands. And those tornadoes that occur in the outer rain bands, those tornadoes often occur well away or far away from the center of the storm. So in other words, the center of the storm could be 200 miles away. We're already getting tornadoes from the outer rain bands. And we saw that with Irma. The day before landfall, we were issuing probably about a dozen, maybe even 20 tornado warnings across southern Florida. Those outer rain bands were beginning to go over the area, and we had to be issuing tornado warnings for those. So we have to be, and that's why, some people may wonder, well, the storm is not supposed to hit until X or until Sunday, let's say. Why are they telling us to evacuate by Saturday? Or why are they telling us to be ready by Saturday morning? Well, because the impacts of the storm, the effects of the storm start hitting us well before the eye makes landfall. In the case of Irma, we started getting impacts 24, maybe even 30 hours before. Those first rain bands started to move in with tropical storm force winds, with possible tornadoes, with torrential rains. We don't want to be out there. We do not want to be out there finishing operations when those rain bands are already moving on shore. So that's why those timelines are set. They're set like that for a reason. And we're going to go over that really quick here over the next few minutes. So what's new for 2018? Well, actually not a whole lot. And it's because a lot of these new things that we rolled them out last year. I mentioned the storm surge warning. That was a big thing that we rolled out in 2017. We also rolled out a time of arrival of tropical storm force wind graphics, which last year was experimental. This year will become operational, and I'll show that here in a second. Okay, first of all, let's talk about the cone. The cone changes every year too. How many of you are cone watchers? How many of you base your decision, whether you're going to get hit or not, whether you think you're going to get hit or not, on exactly where the cone is? Hopefully not too many of you. And I'm going to try to dispel that here over the next couple of minutes here. So it's really good. The cone is the track and cone graphic that we're all used to is a great tool, a great visual as far as telling us where the storm is forecast to go and what areas the center of the storm might track. So the cone represents the probable track of the center of the storm, with emphasis on the center of the storm. The cone does not take into account the size of the storm. It doesn't know how big the storm is. A cone is purely a statistical measure of the likely area or the track area of the center of the storm. So it doesn't really take into account how big it is. It doesn't take into account how far away from the center the winds extend, or how far away the storm is, or the surge is. It doesn't tell you how strong the winds are going to be where you're at. It just gives you an idea of, okay, Looks like the center of the storm might pass pretty close to me here. Now, the cone, as you see on this graphic, has been getting smaller every single year, probably since the inception of the cone back in the early 2000s. Can anyone tell me why the cone's getting smaller? It's more accuracy. So yeah, in other words, our forecasts are getting better and better. In other words, our track errors are getting lower every year, which means that we're more precise as far as the track of the storm, when the storm, where the storm ends up going. So therefore, the cone, which is again the likely track area of the storm, gets smaller as well. And it's like that for every storm. So with every storm that forms in a given year, the cone is exactly the same size. We don't adjust it based on how big the storm is or how bad we think the storm is going to be. It's just a cut and paste. It's a cut and paste product, if you will, in the sense that that cone does not modify or does not get changed by the forecaster. It's computer generated solely. So hopefully that's starting to put something in your mind like, maybe the cone isn't really what it's cracked up to be. So the cone is, in my opinion, most useful when we're about 3 to 5 days out. Okay, so we're 3 to 5 days out. In this example here, this is an example from Irma. Oh, thank you for pointing that out. Uh-oh, well, yeah, it looks like I'm just going to have to, here, I'll just hold it. I'll just hold it here. No problem.
Testing. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. It's fine. See, the reason, I think the reason I went to use the lavalier is because, I like to move around a lot. Maybe that's why I fell. So, okay, so now we're back to plan A. No, not a problem. So the 3 to 5 day period is a time frame when I think the cone is most useful. So in let's say, for example, the 5-day forecast here from Irma last year, there you see the cone was already beginning to move over South Florida. So at that point, when we see something like that, there's a storm that's still about 1,000 plus miles away, that should be an indicator that, okay, in about 5 days or so, we might be threatened by a hurricane. So that's a time when we need to make sure that our hurricane supplies are in order. It doesn't mean that's the time when we need to start developing our plan, right? That means we always should have the plan from way back at the beginning of the season, but this is the time, okay, now I need to really, make sure that I have everything I need, because it's possible that in a couple of days, I'm gonna have to implement that plan. 3 days, the cone, as the storm begins to get closer to us, if we're still in that cone at the 3-day period, especially if we're in that white part of the cone, that means we're at the point where we're probably getting ready to start issuing watches, the hurricane watch for South Florida. So at that point, I think that's the time when we need to really implement our plan, whatever that plan is. If you live in an evacuation area, you need to start thinking, okay, where am I going to be? You need to already have that plan, right? If you're in an evacuation zone, probably your number one thing is, where am I going to spend this? Where am I going to be if a storm threatens? And at this point, that decision probably has to be made. I need to go to where, I'm going to have to go, because it's probable, or at least possible, that my area might be put under an evacuation order. Okay, so now as the storm gets closer, and we're about 24 to 36 hours away, let's say 24 hours away, as in this example here, what happens to the cone? Cone gets narrower, right? It gets smaller, because as the storm gets closer, we're more sure where the center of the storm is going to track. So the cone gets smaller in size, and in this example here, this is the Irma forecast, basically about a day and a half before, actually it was a day before landfall. The cone was already west of us. So some TV stations will zoom in on the cone, and they'll zoom in over South Florida, and they'll show a map of South Florida with all the cities on it, and they'll see, okay, here's Pompano Beach. Well, they're outside the cone. But if you live in Coral Springs, you're in the cone. The cone is not meant to be used that level of detail. It's just not, that's not what it's about. At this point, what we really need to be paying attention to are the watches and warnings. Notice the red outline over Florida and the Bahamas there, those are hurricane warnings that were in effect. So despite the cone technically being west of us, we were under a hurricane warning, and it stayed that way. We did not lower it because the cone was west of us. Remember, the cone is not the area of impact. The cone is the area where the center of the storm is most likely to track. But when you look at it this way, what I did was I just overlaid on top of that cone the wind field of the storm at that time. The blues and the yellows and the reds indicate tropical storm to eventually hurricane force winds as you get closer to the center of the storm. So those winds extended well away from the cone. And those were the winds that eventually came over and affected us here in South Florida. So again, the moral of the story is we need to go beyond the cone to really get what we really need to know, which is what are our impacts going to be? In other words, or better stated, what should we be preparing for? What are the level of impacts that we should be getting ready for? So the National Weather Service, on our website, on our social media pages, which I'll show the accounts here in a little bit, as well as in the briefings that we provide to emergency managers area-wide, we put these graphics available. These graphics are what we call hurricane threat and impact graphics. They're updated with every hurricane center advisory that comes out every 6 hours. And those maps detail the level of potential threat and what we should be preparing for. These graphics take into account where the storm is at the time, how big the storm is, how fast it's moving, how far away from the center of the storm surge is, or the winds, the rainfall. It takes into account actual storm information. It's not a cut and paste product like the cone. It's actually a human-created map. So we take all that into account, and we provide an impact or a threat assessment for each advisory. So this example here, there's actually 3 little maps here, or 3 maps that I overlaid on here. This was a snapshot in time, a progression from 2 days before to the day before Irma landfall, showing you what the different threat levels were for each of the 4 main hazards. So at this time, as you go from yellow to purple, the threats increase, right? So yellow is the lower level threat, still a threat, but lower level. Red, or yellow, orange, red, and purple. Purple being the highest level threat, or the most serious threat. So notice here the wind and the storm surge were the 2 highest threats at that time. We based this off of the potential variations in the forecast track. As we know, those of us that follow hurricanes every year, they don't strictly, or like I said earlier, don't follow a skinny black line. Well, hurricanes don't follow the skinny black line. That's on that map. They will sometimes be really, really close, but they can shift even a little bit, left or to the right. They may move faster, they may move slower. So we have to take that into account when we draw these maps, because we have to make sure that people are prepared for what could happen. We have to be prepared for the possibility, a realistic possibility, that the storm track could shift in a way that's less favorable or worse for us. So these maps take that into account. So what they do is, what they represent is, they represent the level of threat and potential impacts to be prepared for based on variations in the track of the storm, size of the storm, and intensity. We've come up with all these algorithms and all these calculations that simulate different potential forecast tracks, not just the one that we put out officially, but understanding the realistic scenario that those tracks, the actual track, can change to be different. We have to acknowledge that, and we have to communicate that, because small changes can make a big difference in what we end up experiencing here. No forecast is perfect, so we have to responsibly indicate what we call a reasonable worst-case scenario. So these maps here reflect a reasonable worst-case scenario, not the absolute worst-case scenario, because that would be crying wolf all the time, basically. This is a reasonable worst-case scenario. This is a scenario that has a reasonable chance of occurring somewhere in that area. Maybe not Pompano Beach, or maybe Pompano Beach. We have to just consider that. And as the event goes on, as we get closer and closer to the storm, we update those maps to accurately reflect what we feel is that threat at the time. So as Irma got closer, if you look closely at those maps, you'll see the color levels change. Especially as we got to the day before the storm, when it appeared that the center of the storm we were pretty confident that Irma was going to pass along the west coast of Florida. That meant that the wind potential was going to be lower. We weren't going to get those major hurricane force winds. So we lowered the wind levels to the orange and red levels from purple. Still significant winds, not the catastrophic winds. The storm surge threat also came down too, with the storm passing far enough away from us to not, instead of getting maybe 7 feet of surge, we ended up getting 3. Still significant, but not, at a lower level. But notice though the rainfall and the tornado threats actually increased as time went on. So, we always adjust those to accurately reflect what we feel is the situation at that time and what we feel you all should be prepared for. We all should be prepared for. And, so again, this information is available on our website, and there's actually, on our website, we have when we have storms out there that are threatening us and we're under a watch, at least a watch, we're gonna have a link that'll basically take you to a page where you can get all that information from the cone graphic that we're all familiar with, to those hurricane threat and impact graphics that I just showed you, to the latest satellite data, latest radar data, where the watches and warnings are. All that information will be there. It'll be like a one-stop page. So if you visit our website, weather.gov/Miami, especially during a storm event, or if there's at least a chance of a storm affecting us, that information will be promptly displayed for you all to use and hopefully help you to better plan and prepare yourselves. Now, one of the pieces of information that the Hurricane Center put out, started rolling out last year, and this year is becoming operational, is these time of arrival graphics. Now, as you all know, everyone should know, one of probably the most important threshold that we pay attention to is, when are the tropical storm force winds going to begin across the area? Why? As I mentioned earlier, that's a time when conditions are too dangerous for people to be outside. I know in many cases, emergency vehicles stop operating when the winds reach, if not tropical storm force, maybe up to 50 miles an hour, it depends. I've heard different values depending on where you are. So it's important for our plans to incorporate that information. So what we did last year, and we're going to continue to do it this year, and probably who knows for how long, is we provide this graphic as part of the Hurricane Center's suite of information, so people can get an idea. Okay, by what time should I have all my preparations complete? By what time are the conditions going to get too dangerous to be outside? And that's what these graphics get to. These are the time of arrival graphic, or time of arrival of tropical storm force winds. And there's 2 of them. We have what's called the earliest reasonable arrival time, and we have the most likely arrival time. 2 different maps from the same. So now what does that mean? Earliest reasonable time, that's the time, okay, that you can safely assume that if you're done preparing by that time, in almost every case, you're going to be free from tropical storm force winds. In other words, if in this example here, for example, this showed Saturday 8 p.m. as the time when tropical storm force winds, the earliest reasonable arrival time of tropical storm force winds. If you're ready by 8 p.m. Saturday, chances are you're going to be prepared before those dangerous conditions arrive. Okay. So this is best for people that have a low tolerance for risk, or for people or communities that need a long time to prepare. They can't wait until the last second. And I know emergency managers usually key in on this earliest reasonable time to build themselves a safety margin. So all this information that I've been showing you, all those hurricane threat maps, they build in a safety margin to make sure that we're not underprepared. We want to be overprepared. We certainly don't want to be underprepared. Now, there's another one called the most likely time. Most likely time is the one that basically kind of sits right in the middle. So there's a 50% chance that the tropical storm force winds could arrive before that time or after that time. So do you want to take a chance? And play, you want to like wait till the last minute? Well, you could, but you have to understand you're going to be cutting it pretty close. So that's what those two maps represent. Now, as the storm gets closer, these two times are going to get closer as well. So they'll get to a point, it's maybe like within about 12 hours of the storm, that those two are going to be the same or very, very close. But when you're still 2 or 3 days out, those can be as much as 12 hours apart. So, again, those 12 hours or so, think of that as your safety margin, right? You're playing it safe, and it's always good to play things safe when you have a hurricane potentially barreling down towards us. So here are some important websites as far as National Weather Service, Miami office, and where to get this information. I know it's a lot of information to absorb in just a few minutes here, but if you go to weather.gov/South Florida, or South Florida or Miami, either one works. Facebook.com, or Facebook and Twitter. Yes, we're very much active on social media also. Both those platforms, NWS Miami is the keyword to get you to follow us on those two platforms. And we put all local hurricane information on those platforms, as well as the daily weather we get here in South Florida every single day. So as we're beginning to wrap up here, it's important to understand what the watches and the warnings mean. I already referred to the storm surge watch and warning, but the old traditional tropical storm hurricane watches and warnings, those are going to be around. Those aren't going anywhere anytime soon. It's important to know what they mean and what time frames we're looking at. So watch is the first level of alert. We're about 48 hours away from possibly experiencing conditions. Then at the warning time frame, that's 36 hours before. So warning means conditions are expected somewhere in that warning area. Maybe not, it might not end up being where you are, but it could be somewhere in that area that's depicted under the warning within 36 hours. So yes, we have to put it out well in advance because hurricanes involve a lot of preparation, a lot of potential movement of people, evacuations, etc. So that's why we can't wait until we know for sure it's coming. We have to put it out well in advance to get all those, to allow time for all of our preparation to be completed before those tropical storm force winds arrive. And that's really what our public response should be based off of. It should be based on those watches and warnings, not only on the cone, not only on the forecast track, but using all that information as part of a package, as part of a communications package. And that's one thing that we've been really trying to emphasize more and more is not just putting out those warnings and let people figure it out for themselves, but explain what the situation is, why we put out those threat and impact graphics so that we can paint a picture to people. You're under a warning, well, here's what you're under threat of. That's the information that we provide to Kimberly and to all the emergency managers across the area so they can better understand, and then we can work together to provide the information, to really, our job is to facilitate, to provide the information that Kimberly and her team uses to make those critical decisions here in the city, and that goes for really every emergency management agency that we work with here in South Florida. So the bottom line is, we need to know our area and its vulnerabilities, in general and also specifically. If we live in an evacuation zone, we're vulnerable from storm surge. If we live in a FEMA flood zone, that means that we're vulnerable to rainfall flooding, even if we're not in an evacuation zone. We need to stay abreast of official hurricane information. So by official, I mean, of course, the National Weather Service, City of Pompano Beach, Broward County, local media. Local, because yes, the national media does a good job of covering storms, but they don't have the local contacts. You know, you mentioned earlier, Sandra mentioned earlier, you used to fax all the local TV stations and radio stations. Well, why? Because they're the ones that are here. They have the information. So make sure you get your information from local sources. And of course, we always encourage, pass along the message, the heat evacuation orders that are issued by county officials. And no, we do not order evacuations. Yes, we probably have a say in it by the information that we're providing, but we do not recommend evacuations. We will provide the information, and then the decision is made by the local officials. We talked about evacuations. That should be number one in your plan. Know whether you live in an evacuation zone or not. If not, you should plan to shelter in place. Or, as I hear a lot, emergency managers always say, evacuate tens of miles, not hundreds of miles. Because the traffic jams, as we know, is pretty much a given when the hurricane's threatening Florida. We're such a big state. So many people live here, and we're often in the crosshairs of a major hurricane, so people are going to flee. People that do have to leave, they're in an evacuation zone, and those that maybe don't live in an evacuation zone but decide to leave anyway. So please allow yourselves plenty of time if you have to evacuate. So just to wrap up here now, yes, we're starting hurricane season officially on June 1, and hurricane season is a marathon. In other words, we're not sprinting to June 1, and then that's it, it's over, right? We just, we forget about it. No, we want to make sure that we stay vigilant throughout the season. Yes, we know that the hurricane season is rarely active from June 1 all the way to November 30th. In other words, there aren't storms every single day of the year. Kimberly's graph showed that peak of September 10, which happened to work out that way last year, but August through October is the most active period. And in South Florida, almost all of the hurricanes, I think all but two in our history, all of them have hit between August and October, or in those 3 months. So that's really the time that we need to be extra vigilant. So hurricanes can strike any year, even in inactive years. So again, going back to that outlook I showed at the beginning, don't rely on that outlook as, okay, that's my guide as far as whether we're going to get hit or not. We can be hit. Hurricane Andrew occurred in 1992 in a very inactive or below normal year. We got hit by Irma in a very active year last year. So we can get hit in any year. And yes, unfortunately, we can be hit in back-to-back years, or even back-to-back-to-back. There's nothing that says that can't happen. So we just have to be ready. Every storm needs to be taken seriously. Sometimes, actually, this might be counterintuitive, but our experience can sometimes be a negative as far as being situationally aware or taking these threats seriously, because sometimes our perception of what we've been through is a little bit off. For example, I know a lot of people think that, especially those who live in Broward and Palm Beach counties, I've heard some people say, oh yeah, I went through Hurricane Andrew in 1992. Well, you went through the outermost fringe of Hurricane Andrew, but you didn't go through a Category 5. You didn't even go through a Category 2 probably, maybe a 1, maybe. So don't don't say, well, this storm looks like Andrew, or this storm is going to miss us like Andrew did. Take every storm threat seriously and take each one on an individual basis. So when we put out our forecast, we don't compare it to a past storm. We're analyzing that storm and that storm only. And don't, as I mentioned before, and I'll say it one more time, don't over-rely on that exact forecast track. Consider that there could be slight variations, and that's why we put up those threat and impact maps to account for those realistic variations that occur with every storm. And I want to finish off on a high note. All this gloom and doom here, but I want to finish off on a high note, and this goes right back to the beginning of when Kimberly introduced me, is National Weather Service has this program or an initiative called Weather Ready Nation, and it's pretty much what the name implies. It's an initiative that is about building a weather-ready nation, making sure that our communities or individuals, communities, have the information and the means to be prepared against weather hazards. And there's a program within that called Weather Ready Nation Ambassador, and Pompano Beach is front and center in that. We are a Weather Ready Nation Ambassador, which means that, you know, they basically walk the walk, if you will, right? Or walk the talk, or talk the walk, I forget how you say it. But in other words, they take that message. You know, they embrace the Weather Ready Nation initiative. They make, you know, by the very fact that we're having this here today means that, you know, the city is taking this seriously and works hard every day to make sure that we're ready, that we're as prepared as we can be for any natural weather and any natural hazards, weather-related hazards that might impact us. So really, it's about building and maintaining partnerships to better educate and prepare our communities against weather hazards. So I congratulate you once again for your outstanding job in being a Weather Ready Nation Ambassador, and really applying that the way that the National Weather Service envisions that for all of our communities in the U.S. So with that, I'll wrap up. Thank you very much, and have a good hurricane season. Safe one, too. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rob. Outstanding job. And I hope that you all appreciate and got as much information from that as I did. I learned something new every time, and I love how the products evolve with the technology. So embracing that change, how we all are, and I really appreciate that. And to all of our speakers today, I really appreciate the expertise that you shared. Suzette, Chief Jurgel, Sandra, Ed, where do I have Andrew, and Allison. So I really appreciate your participation, you know, annually, and I don't have to fight for it. They willingly and encouragingly do this to make sure that we're a better prepared city and that we're able to better face anything that might come. So I appreciate your time, and thank you so much. Bye-bye.
It's been an hour.